Okay, so yeah, so I'm asked about people of color, and then I'm also asked about women of color, and I get angry. So I was telling Chris earlier that I wrote the blog post in one sitting right after AEA. I had just pretty much just finished my dissertation, and AEA had just happened. And I wrote it in one fell swoop, and then I inserted the links and everything a little bit later, and I forgot that it was going to be posted. It was by coincidence that it was the first week of March, but I did think that would be apt. And so my anger is that I'm definitely not the first person saying anything that I've said, and I feel like in this moment, in this political moment, things are trending, right? That had been said for the first time in the 80s, in the 70s. And you would never know, right? And so I don't know. I'm curious to hear. I was telling Chris also that I was almost more curious to hear from everyone else how they heard the blog or read it, what their reactions were, because I wasn't expecting the reaction. Okay, so like a lot of brown women, I'm a lot older than I look and act and feel. So so I'm almost 50, and I have 25 years, and I've been politicized since 7th grade. I started organizing in 7th grade. So I've been paying attention, and I don't think that's unique. The interviews that I did with the scholars of color all were part of movement organizing, in particular Black Power movement and American Indian movement, and there were Asian American women too, by the way, who were also erased. And so I did believe, maybe because I'm the daughter of immigrants, I did believe that once I had a few years under my belt, once I got this degree, once I got that degree, once I worked at a large multi-million-dollar agency and at the director level, I really thought people would start to listen, and people would start to listen to what I'm saying. Okay, but they don't, and that's the myth of meritocracy. It really doesn't matter how many degrees you have. It doesn't matter how old you are. People don't listen to what they don't want to hear. Okay, and what I'm bringing to the table, I did not get from my degrees. I got it from community. I got it from my parents. I got it from my husband. I got it from my friends who are all very politically active. And so to think that by getting the degree, I would finally be heard, was a part of the story, right? That, keep quiet for now, and then once you know what we know, all right, then we'll listen to you. But that never happens. And so once I started seeing how the politics of erasure happen in real time before my very eyes, okay, on Eval Talk, at work, at school, I started thinking, what am I waiting for? And then see, now I have younger evaluators of color, right? A lot of millennials. I have my daughter, and I see the same kind of thinking in them, and I feel terrible because it's a purposeful way to silence, and so I was like, I have nothing to lose. Okay, nobody that I used to think I wanted a job with is going to hire me anymore anyway. Okay, I don't want to work for them. So I know I have 10 years, 5,000 articles, 350 pages of dissertation behind me, and it's black and white. I saw what was published, and I saw what was promoted, The graphs are very clear. They're not very good in my dissertation, though. I had to format them in a way that I didn't like to. So just a caveat there. I heard from 10 to 15, 12 basically, evaluators of color, and well, two white women, one white man, and then the remainder are evaluators of color. And so, so the conclusions are very clear. There is no confusion. And when people hear about it and read about it, it matches their experience. Nobody's telling me that that is not what happens. I did member check. And so I was like, you know, what do I have to lose? Okay, I just have to say what I have to say. And if people don't hire me, if people attack me, I'm too old and I don't care anymore.
And she says, okay, I'm going to ask my burning question. How do you know their work was erased? I do not doubt it, just would like to know how.
Okay. Is
it easier to assume they were ignored rather than erased?
Yes, it is easier to assume that they were ignored than erased, but it's not true. And this is the constant tension that polite conversation has, because people don't want to acknowledge the difference between intent and impact. Okay, and that's why I was talking about the politics of citation. All right, we make choices every day in what we talk about, who we put on air, right, who we invite as a guest, who we cite. Okay, and we can make the choice to cite the same people over and over again. All right, and that's why people, when you think about a lot of these issues, the first people you think about are Donna Mertens and Karen Kirkhardt, but they did not say anything new. And there is documentary evidence. Okay, so if we consider ourselves evaluators, we should know, all right, that there was Anna Madison before, there was Kian Lee, there was Hazel Simonet, there was Joan LaFrance, okay? And they were not alone. There are people who left the field, okay, because they were not getting anywhere in it, okay? And so we don't see them, right? That's erasure. That is not benign negligence, right? That's active erasure. When you create a whole entire model, right, the evaluation theory tree, all right, and oral histories, and you do not include a single woman of color, not even 1%, okay, of all of those people, that's not an accident, okay? That's intentional. And so we reproduce the social circles that we live in, all right? So if you only interact with white people in everything you do, and all the decision-making tables are white, you don't even notice, all right? When half the population isn't there, all right? Or now evaluation is predominantly women, actually, numerically, not in terms of power. And the only way you think about people of color are as program participants, all right? And it's not true. So I have, like I said, 5,000 articles. I can't tell you who wrote all those articles because we don't collect that data, okay? But I can tell you what they were talking about. And they were talking about structural racism as early as the 80s. It's not new. They had a structural analysis. They talked about program participants leading evaluation in the interest of self-advocacy 20, 30, 40 years ago. So it's really not a new idea. And maybe it's being heard now because of the current political administration. Maybe people are so fed up that they're willing to acknowledge the possibility of intentional malintent. But once you have been erased in enough rooms, I've been in a room of 10 people as director of evaluation, 600-person agency, $50 million budget, 46 programs, 17 locations. Okay, I was the highest ranking person of color. And I was in a room of 10 directors and I was skipped. Round robin vote, I was skipped. That could happen to you once and you might think it was a mistake, all right? But it's not the first time it happened. It's not the only time it happened. I'm not the only person it happened to. And when you don't believe us over and over again, when we tell you the truth, okay, that's active erasure.
Yeah, I had a question that I had written in the chat box there about evaluation education. And so there's always a lot of talk about creating pipelines for evaluators of color through Milwaukee Evaluation, through the Expanding the Bench initiative. But a lot of them do go through higher education, which has its own problems.
Right.
And so, you know, what would you say about the role of eval education should be playing in centering women of color and people of color in the field, in terms of, should we invite more people into higher ed where it can often be traumatic for students of color, or should we really be focusing on other paths? And just kind of your big picture thoughts on that.
No, that's a great question. So I think, like everything, right? It's more than one. It's not, you know, that's the other thing, is that the binary is also so ingrained in us. So I'm really trying to unlearn the binary of either or. I think that higher education, first of all, could do a lot better. Okay, right? It could include women of color and people of color in general in the canon, which would allow the experience to be less traumatic. It would allow people to stay in the field. Okay. And okay, this idea about the pipeline is still, to me, it's still in sync with this myth of meritocracy, right? Because we keep thinking, oh, there aren't any, right? And we need to, you know, we need to attract them, and we need to recruit them, and we need to train them. And then, like you said, they get trained in thinking a certain way, which is not the knowledge that they're bringing necessarily from their communities, right? Or their ancestors. And so, because I think that if I had not been saying anything I'm saying, and I'd gotten the PhD, and I wanted to continue leading the way things are led, I mean, I think I might have been more accepted. Okay, but because I insist on bringing my ancestors and my community into the room with me, I'm not. And so what I really think will change is organizing among others, right? And I mean organizing, I don't mean service to us, okay? Because we know something, okay? We have something to contribute to the conversation, right? And so women of color are certainly not the only group that is erased, right? And I have to be careful because I feel like I'm falling into binaries again when I say that, even because women of color are not just women of color, but we're queer, and we're women with disabilities, and, you know, so all of that is there too. But I think that if there are more opportunities, more fora created for women of color, in this case, since we're talking about it, to convene, all right, and organize among ourselves and build power and engage in collective action, which is happening. Actually, it's happening right now in the Twin Cities. Thanks in part, actually, to my work and the politicization of the Twin Cities. We have 70 evaluators of color and Indigenous evaluators who are angry, just like I am. Sorry, okay. And we're doing stuff. I mean, we're presenting together. People want to publish together. People have organized about how data is disaggregated and how it isn't disaggregated, which all has implications. And we would know those things, right? I mean, the Southeast Asian community in Minnesota successfully changed the way that race and ethnicity data is disaggregated in an attempt to distinguish between people like my parents, okay, who came here voluntarily from Asia as a result of the 1965 Immigration Act, and people who came here involuntarily as a result of the US imperial war in Southeast Asia, okay? And so we have totally different circumstances, totally different perspectives, and that is erased purposely to serve white supremacy, to serve the argument that discrimination based on race and ethnicity doesn't exist because the Asians are doing so great. But they unraveled that narrative, and they made a change in schools and in social services. And that didn't come from the academy. That came from people on the ground organizing.
Jeremy, Vidhya, what I'm concerned about is whether this is a problem we can solve or address well from the ground, so to speak. For example, if the silencing is coming from publishers, journals, books, maybe a decade or more for there to be noticeable movement. Blogs and other social media will help in the long run, but right now I've seen a strong bias from official channels and a downplaying of gray sources, and naming it as such is itself a slight. So that's a, a thought more than a question, but what do you think?
So I think, oh, sorry, this is my problem with curly hair. I think, I agree. Okay, I am not waiting anymore for white institutions to change. That's the truth. I think that people of color, I think that, to be honest, I think a lot of communities of color have known this for centuries, but white institutions are probably not going to change, and they're just going to become irrelevant and obsolete. And so communities of color need to start our own businesses, which we already have, and they're continually raised to the ground. We need to, we are the largest source of employment for other people of color, so-called minority-owned businesses, even though we are the global majority. And when we organize, things change in response to us, and then they morph again, they change shape, and so we have to keep doing it. But they are never going to change just because we, on the inside, politely ask them to. And it's going to take people who actually care in a different world, care about investing in a different world, regardless of the color, right? Regardless of the racial category, it's going to take us demanding from higher education, for example, and from journals, a change. It's not going to happen by the leadership that's there, because why would they? It doesn't serve them. And no change, no political change in the US has ever happened, right, within systems. Systems have responded to people organizing outside. And that's why I think, in response to Libby's question, that it's kind of like with the military, right? I really don't want to be part of the military. And yet I don't want the military keeping me out, right? And so in terms of higher ed, if I make the choice that I don't want to be fried by the system, that's one thing, but it's paternalistic, right, of us to say that, I don't want people to endure the trauma of the academy. And so I think that people of color and other communities can make that decision for ourselves. But allies, so-called allies or accomplices, or anyone who believes in the same kind of alternate world has to organize with us, okay? And organizing with us is not speaking for us, okay? It's not extending us opportunities to train in STEM or whatever it might be. It's actually listening to what we say and believing us, and putting your jobs on the line with us, right? Because if we don't have, if I don't have work right now, this is the truth, I'm not exaggerating. If I don't have work right now, I have a whole village in Sierra Leone, okay, where the kids can't go to school and they can't buy rice, okay? And so we are actually tied to the communities that we're bringing their knowledge supposedly into the evaluation world, into the academy, and I have a responsibility to stay employed in order to make sure that that connection remains. We have something to lose, and so if you don't, okay, you need to listen to us, and you need to be there on the ground with us, so that we can, I have two people who are telling me that if I lose my job, they're going with me, because everything that they've learned has been from me, all right? Not in a formal capacity. I'm not paid for that training, all right? But that takes guts, and I don't think a lot of people have demonstrated that kind of guts.
Asks, how do we reach out in a positive way to those who don't want to hear, or those, and that dropped away. Okay. No, is anger an effective way to get your message across? And how can we reach out in a positive way to those who don't want to hear, or those who can't hear? Those were his two questions. One was asked and the other And Libby attempted to answer one of them, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on this idea of how do we reach out and whether or not that's a responsibility in the first place. But please, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Okay, so once again, you don't have to even be angry, okay, to be accused of being angry. All right. So if you are a woman of color and you speak in complete sentences about racism and you know about the history of erasure and you can name structures and policies, you're accused of being angry just by uttering the words race. Okay. And so it does not pay to try to be nice. Okay. And to try to be positive. Are you serious? Okay. Do you know what is going on? I mean, I have to worry. Okay, I have to worry about whether my husband actually comes home at night. Okay, I have to worry about my daughter playing in the alley. And you want me to be positive, okay, in hopes of that white people will listen. They don't listen. Okay, you can be in a boardroom and you can say all the right things and you can show the data, okay, and you can speak proper English, okay, and dress conventionally, I think, okay. People don't listen. All right. They don't listen. They don't interact with people of color on a daily basis as friends. This is statistically shown, okay, that white people think they have friends of color, okay, but that's just because they wave to people across the way. All right. When you ask people of color, you know, who are your friends? Okay, do you have people over for dinner? Would you have them watch your kids while you're away? That is a friendship, okay? So they don't notice, all right? They just reproduce their same social circles over and over again. And then when you are perceived as an interloper, because you're in that boardroom as a person of color, and suddenly, you know, especially as an Asian American, like now you're not talking like us anymore, okay? You're not the kind of brown person that we wanted here, all right? We didn't know what we were getting into when we hired you, all right? We were satisfying our diversity quota, right? Okay. But we didn't expect you to bring these politics in here. Okay, now you sound like the kind of person of color that we actually don't want here. All right. I'm done. I'm 50, for God's sake. Okay, how long am I supposed to say things in a positive way in hopes, right, that someone who's never had to deal with any of this stuff is going to listen? I'm not doing it anymore. Okay, and I think this is partly about gender, and I think it's partly about race. I mean, it comes off very differently if a man of color, if a differently racialized woman of color, right? If a queer woman of color. Okay, so I have the legitimacy, right? In some respects, like I said, I speak the right kind of English. I'm married to a man. Okay, so it varies, but I'm not morphing myself anymore in hopes that somebody might listen, because I know they're not going to listen. They're only going to listen if they have to, and that is in response to collective action. Okay, so if we organize collectively and demand that higher ed produce curricula and syllabi that actually reflects the history of evaluation, they will have to respond. Okay, and same with the journals, and same with AEA. All right, but if I go in as one person on the board and say, oh, excuse me, do you think you could, they're not listening. I've tried it, and I'm not the only person who's tried it. I said I have a whole dissertation worth of people who have tried it, and it didn't work. It didn't work for them, it's not working for me, and it's not gonna work tomorrow for anybody else. So I'm not gonna train the millennials of color now, you know, to say things in a different way in hopes of being heard, because they're not gonna be heard. Okay, so this is where this thing about social groups really matters. Okay, so, and that piece about higher ed too. Okay, so if, like I said, I mean, we are in this country, especially, and actually very much so in Minnesota, we are racially segregated. Okay, residentially, occupationally, and otherwise. And so if you are not engaging with people of color and women of color, queer people, people with disabilities who are organizing, you may not know it, but we are organizing right underneath your nose. you're not integrated. I mean, so you might think of yourself as open-minded, liberal, progressive, even radical, okay? But if you're not actually in other people's houses, you know, breaking bread with them, organizing with them, working with them on the ground, and if you basically just see white people all the time, you're not actually doing it, okay? And so if you are doing it, then you will know what work is already happening, okay? And so, you know, that doesn't mean that you necessarily need to be organizing. I mean, right here we had a huge win with janitorial workers here organizing, and I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't on the front lines with them, okay? I'm following their work, but this could be in any space, right? So if, you know, if you're in the academy, students are organizing, okay? Service staff are organizing, okay? So who do you spend most of your day with, right? Even other academics, okay, they may not be organizing because they can't necessarily, but they are resisting in their own way, okay? And it's your job to find out what's going on and how you can be useful, okay? So it's not a matter of finding, you know, these secret places. It's actually all around us, but we're so used to interacting with the same kind of people and talking the same kind of language and running meetings the same kind of way that there's no room and we don't notice. And that's why the erasure piece is important, because we don't see it right in front of our eyes. That's why you can be in a room of 10 people, the only woman of color, the only person of color in that case, and be skipped, okay? Because that agency has never seen people of color in the boardroom. The only people of color they've ever seen were clients, okay? And so I think that if people are looking for work, all right, they need to start reading what other people of color are reading. And we are writing and producing material, it's out there. But if you don't have any relationships, then you need to start working, all right? You need to start working on behalf of people of color and not thinking that you can stay where you are and bring people of color in.
So this is a question from Amy. The topic of unpaid labor makes me wonder about the exploitative nature of capitalism. When you mention the unacknowledged work and labor that goes into building relationships with communities, how can you articulate value or worth of your contributions to folks like org leaders and funders? And to what extent is that type of advocacy for resources exploitative? And I just also want to name that Amy also asked another question just in the chat that about the audience of this webinar.
Okay, so I definitely noticed, it's so funny because I was actually just talking to my daughter this morning, and I was like, you know, it's interesting if as a person of color and when you find that your audience is all white, that's disturbing actually. Okay, so I'm very aware of that and I don't understand it. It's not necessarily true here in Minnesota, just so you know, the group, I mean, I have a lot of colleagues here of color who are resonating with all of this. It's not new to any of them, but it does make you pause when it's like, okay, just the observation that you made, okay. As for the asserting value, acknowledging value about the work that you're doing in a capitalist system where it's only certain kinds of labor that are valued and it's at the expense of other people. Yeah, this is the catch-22, right? Because we, you know, like I said, I need to be paid. People's lives are depending on me being paid. And that's within a capitalist construct, right? And so one of the reasons I use that metaphor from feminism and Marxism really about invisible labor is that we depend on, you know, now we can see it with the coronavirus, right? So who's considered essential workers and who's not, right? And does pay correspond, right? And so, you know, I'm now home with my daughter and my partner, and we have to continue working and homeschooling her and caring for her. And that's, so caring for her and homeschooling her is considered reproductive labor, devalued, and it's necessary, right? We are all depending on that labor, and yet we don't acknowledge it, let alone value it in a way that will ensure someone's continued survival. All right, so it doesn't have to be money, it doesn't have to be pay, right? But can I necessarily, so if I'm at work and I'm the one who is providing staff with an understanding of their work in a larger context outside my job description, I'm not paid for it, I'm not, it's not recognized in any of my performance appraisals, okay, but they're providing better work for the agency and for the clients, right, based on the unacknowledged invisible labor that I'm expending, okay? How can we ensure that even if I'm not paid for it, right, I have job security, right? Or that I don't have to go into work and dread every single day, that I'm comfortable at work, that I feel whole at work. So, I mean, I feel like these are ways that if we would have to dismantle capitalism, but that's not necessary right this second, okay? That's not gonna happen tomorrow, all right? We can dismantle capitalistic relations, right, in a meeting that we're holding right this second, right? Even if we can't dismantle the structure, I mean, the way I interact with people whose labor I depend on, do I acknowledge it, right? Do I make sure that if they're going down, I'm going down with them? Do I find ways outside the system to make sure that they can still survive? And people organizing do that. I mean, like they do say that, okay, so if you lose your job, you can stay with us, right? Or I'll keep your kids or whatever while you're looking for work. People do that. People have always done that. I mean, if you see, I saw Selma again recently and I was like, that was all orchestrated, right? Like, how are you going to get food, en route? Like, where are you going to stay? People do think like that. But when you have gotten enculturated into the academy and into white institutions, you forget, okay, that all of this other labor has to happen, all right? And it all has to be carefully considered. And so we just think, well, there's no way. Well, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to quit? Am I supposed to not blah, blah, blah? But there are billions of ways, right? And we've forgotten what they are because we don't know our history. And we're disconnected from the communities that are doing that right this second. Like there are a lot of people right now who are organizing in that way because some people have to work, their kids have to be watched, and they're doing it. I mean, I'll stop there. But yeah, go on to other questions. Right, so this is the Martin Luther King said this and it's quoted all the time. The worst kind of obstacle, I guess, is well-meaning white people, because well-meaning white people think they're beyond reproach, okay? And so because, because they're not necessarily wearing hoods, they cannot examine their own behavior. They can't reflect on their own behavior, right? And so if a person of color does get angry, okay, and we do, that's not appropriate behavior, right? And so then they're attacked, right? Because I was being nice, right? I didn't say, the N-word or anything, right? And so that ability to reflect on how you're actually operationalizing the same oppressive dynamics in the way that you talk to somebody, in the way that you orchestrate meetings, in the way that you discipline staff, right? In the punitive kind of ways that you talk about what staff contribute, okay? That's all part of white supremacy. It's all part of patriarchy, right? It's all part of policing people's behavior. And it is oppressive, okay? And just because you don't say it while you're foaming at the mouth doesn't mean that you're not upholding white supremacy. And so I think it's actually, this whole idea of social betterment. I mean, when I looked into social betterment, which I did do for my dissertation, I mean, it was hilarious to me because the people advocating, and I'm not going to name names, but you can read my dissertation and find them there. And it's all public knowledge, okay? So the people talking about social betterment, okay, were making racially charged comparisons with welfare, right? Okay, so if you look up, all you have to do is look up social betterment, okay, and find the original literature that talked about it. Okay, so welfare is better than work, okay? So first of all, they're tapping into that discourse. This was written in 1998, right after welfare reform, okay, which is the whole legislation about welfare reform is built on this idea of the promiscuous Black woman who's just trying to get a check, okay? That's called the Personal Work Opportunity Responsibility Act, okay? And so then you start dog whistling about welfare, okay? But saying that you're talking about social betterment, okay? This is how white supremacy gets upheld every single day, okay? And it happens without, we can't even see it, right? And so when this happens in our offices, white people are caught off guard when you point it out. You know, you're talking about welfare reform here, okay? What is the comparison? What are you really trying to say, right? But because it's all through dog whistle politics, you can't actually point anything out in what they said, okay? But it's part of this disavowal of the truth, right? So the truth can be happening in plain sight, but you don't acknowledge it, you don't see it happening, and you can't say anything. And that's because white people who are in evaluation, in education, and a lot of these fields, social work, right, have lost the ability to actually think about what are you actually saying and what are you actually doing. And I would argue that that's true for all of us, that I can get complacent too. And yet I think it's magnified for white women whose ability to benefit from the system rests on their niceness, right? And many women of color have just given up because we know that it's not gonna work anyway.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So I identify as a Black queer woman, and I'm a research analyst for a school district in the suburbs surrounding Chicago. And a lot of the work I do is around the experiences of students of color in the classroom and lifting those voices and writing reports so white administrators could hopefully use those perspectives to create some sort of change. And I've been thinking a lot about pursuing a PhD that explores what decolonization of education looks like. And the irony of pursuing that sort of an education in a colonial, like white supremacist institution is not lost on me. So I'm just wondering, like, what words of encouragement or wisdom or like reality check you have for me, and any resources or platforms that you might know of for folks of color who might want to explore a PhD to use to, you know, sift through opportunities that might be cause as least amount of trauma as possible. So that's my question.
Yeah. Okay. So, so first of all, you can always call me. Okay. And email me, and I'm dead serious about that. That's been the most rewarding part about getting old now, is that people do ask me for resources and advice, and I love actually, having suffered for 25 years, I love actually, you know, being useful, because I'm not always considered useful officially, right? I'm not necessarily rewarded for being useful, but it's a reward to have it actually help somebody. So that's one thing. But I'm not the only person. Okay, so Tamara Bertrand-Jones is, I believe she's still active in AEA. I mean, she was until a few years ago at least. And I did just talk to her recently this year. She used to put, or she may still continue, she used to propose a session at AEA of evaluators, senior evaluators of, and I don't know if she phrased it of color, but senior evaluators, and she used to propose it in the multi-ethnic issues topical interest group. Okay, and so that was my first, I mean, talking about crediting, I did credit her in the blog. That was my first realization that what I'm seeing around me is not really evaluation. and that there's all these evaluators of color that are hidden in plain sight. And it was orchestrated as an opportunity for younger evaluators or emerging evaluators to know that they had a whole ancestry, a whole lineage behind them. Okay, so that's one thing. There are the topical interest groups at AEA, and they are active in helping folks publish and navigate. And today, the LARAD TIG is hosting a session with Art Hernandez about academia. So I can let you know about that if you don't already know about it. So the TIGs grew in response to AEA as a whole failing us, right? And then there are other organizations, but there probably are organizations on your campus, maybe wherever you end up, but you're definitely, I mean, I think the biggest thing is you're not alone. So if you know that you're not alone, there's lots of literature, and you can read, if you haven't already, you can read Eve Tuck's Decolonization is Not a Metaphor, because she really talks about how if we're going to use the metaphor of decolonization, it actually involves repatriation and reparations. And it's not just a fancy new way of saying whatever. There's a material exchange. And so once you see that there's so much that's already been written about, even in educational research, which is a neighbor of evaluation, there's some, Eve Tuck comes from educational research and policy. So Gloria Ladson-Billings, there are people who are bringing in critical race theory and Indigenous frameworks, post-colonial theory, but evaluation doesn't ever feature any of them, right? And that's why I talk about it as active erasure. So as long as I think if you have a support system around you of people who are organizing, it's survivable. I mean, it did take me 10 years, but it is survivable. People have done it, and you could do it. And I'm not kidding when I say, to contact me, because there's other people too. I mean, I'll
hit you up for sure. I really appreciate that, and I appreciate you. So thank you.
Thanks. Well, it's funny because in 2016 is the first time that I fully revealed. I came out as angry as I am, because I was still trying to package it a little bit more politely before then. And so I revealed my theoretical framework for my dissertation to the nonprofit and foundations TIG, I think that's what it's called. And the three the three components of my theoretical framework were the 3 pillars of white supremacy. That's one, and then the 5 faces of oppression, and then the mechanisms-based model. Which, so the 3 pillars of white supremacy is especially the one that I thought I thought people were going to throw tomatoes at me, and I was really scared. But everybody from that session just rushed to the front of the room and started talking to me, and I realized that so many people feel what I feel. And so but you still never know that, because you're taught to think that you're crazy, which of course is a ableist phrase, right? And so I'm still told that I'm the only one in workplaces and in work contexts, like, well, you might think that, but the others don't, or, you're just too angry, you have a chip on your shoulder, you've been too, wounded, right? And so I guess I'm used to other people of color resonating now. I'm starting to get used to that you're never alone. I mean, that's what I really wanted Lauren to hear, but any of us, that if you think it, you're probably not the only person. But I didn't think that a mainstream audience would respond. I did, and that makes me think, how much we're thirsting, right? How, what a malpractice, right? The evaluation education has demonstrated, right, in failing us, to give us this history. And I was like, this is just like whatever, 450 words, on like a tiny little piece, right, of, And if it gets this kind of reaction, think about what, if we had efforts that were actually funded, right, to uncover this erased history, right? Like, so that's why I want to do a series of oral histories just on that kind of work, Anna Madison and Kian Lee and John LaFrance and all of their work. If anybody wants to fund me, if anybody's out there, I would like to create like generative networks for people of color and any of the kind of caucus groups within to publish, to get ideas about experiential workshops, teaching cases, and so there's a lot that could be done actively by women of color, by people of color, by queer folks who have also been erased, people with disabilities who have also been erased. I think part of the problem is changing the discourse so that it's not service to us, okay? But it's allowing us to document our presence and to contribute our subjugated knowledge into the field. So yeah.
Thank you. But all that said, early on, I said I was having a hard time hearing you, and I made you went and you got an earphone and you did all that. And at one point I figured out it was me.
Oh no!
But there was something metaphorical about it that I like. There's a scratchy sound, and I'm having you change your headset so that people can hear you, when all along it's how I'm hearing, and it's the technology that's in front of me.
That's
and yeah, it was a weird metaphor, but overall, thank you, Vidhya. I really appreciated jumping in, and I hope this is one of many future collaborations, and I'm looking forward to drawing you some cartoons when you have the chance. And for anybody who has followed this conversation, thank you too. Paying attention is it's something people do pay. It costs something. So when people give you attention, I always appreciate attention. So thank you for taking the time to join us, and
thank you.
And more conversations like this to come.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Vidhya. And thanks, everyone. All right.
Bye.